Greetings everybody and welcome to G4G on YouTube. Today we're going to talk about the World of Warcraft expansion coming up called Shadowlands. So it was teased in BlizzCon of 2019 that we would be getting the next expansion to World of Warcraft. It would be called Shadowlands, and we're now finally starting to deal with some of the information concerning the alpha and the beta. So as of this week, it looks like Ian Hazzikostas is saying that we will be getting a closed alpha being released to the semi-public by the end of the week. This is amazing news for me because I would love to very much be a part of it, number one. Number two, this is a good time for people like myself who like to experiment with alphas and betas, like to do footage of them and put them up on YouTube and everything. What better time than now to do content like this, since we're all, or at least the great majority of us are, stuck home with the itis quarantine and everything like that. So yeah, I would be absolutely thrilled to get this alpha later in the week. It's also going to be Easter week, where I've got Friday off from my job. I plan to take Monday off also, so it'll be a nice 4-day weekend, and it'll be a nice distraction. And right now my main is exalted with the 2 new factions and everything, so other than working on my alt, which we'll see a little bit later in the video, my Death Knight, there's not much for me to do in WoW right now that isn't like old Mog farming or mount farming. So this will be a good time for me to split off and do some alpha content, provided I do get into it. You can Google the beta opt-in to find the World of Warcraft link, where you can tell your account on the website, I want to opt into the beta. Now this is different than in the years past, where you did it by going to Battle.net and you flagged your Blizzard clients as if you wanted to be parts of betas and alphas, like directly on Battle.net. This time you're going to a dedicated site to Shadowlands, so keep that in mind. That is something a little bit different, and it needs to be highlighted, especially if you've worked betas and alphas in the past. For me, I was part of the Wrath beta. I did not get into Cataclysm. Wrath beta at the time was a key. A then ex-girlfriend of mine was given a key by somebody she knew, and she's like, well, I'm never going to play it, and she gave it to me, and I got into Wrath. I got skipped for Kata. I got into Mop, and much like Wrath, I heavily played the Mop beta, unfortunately to an extent where it sort of killed that expansion for me. I did too much of the Mop beta and semi-restarted it when my current girlfriend got into the beta too, and I had to essentially go back a little bit to pull her up to the level that I was at. So I was redoing content, and then the game dropped and I leveled fast, and again I went backwards a little bit to help my girlfriend level. So Mop really was blown wide open for me way too early, and I just kind of got very bored of the expansion. When the Warlords beta hit, I took it very casual because I was afraid to I was afraid to burn out on it. And then the Legion beta, I did play a Demon Hunter through its starting zone and everything, and did a little bit of some other characters. And when it came to Biffa, again, I was in the Biffa one, played it through a Hunter and I think my main character, but admittedly Blizzard really screwed up when it came to the Biffa alpha and beta. Azerite armor wasn't available to test early on. Character transfers didn't occur until later. I don't think you were ever able to do a max template character and experience raids. I raided in the Mop beta, and I raided in the Wrath beta. I went into Naxxramas and Terrace of the Eternal Springs for their respective expansions and everything. So I'm looking forward to hopefully return to a normal alpha beta cycle when it comes to Shadowlands, and we need it. So, according to Hazakostas, alpha players will get the chance to tackle the new zone of Bastion, the heavenly side of Shadowlands' afterlife theme. Later this month, the team plans to add another zone, which I believe is Revendreth, and Torghast, which is the endless dungeon experience, which is a tower that I believe you ascend, sort of like the way the old Mortal Kombat combats were actually. Remember, if you went up the tower until you eventually faced Goro and Shao Kahn and all of that. As you fought through 1 and 2, you kind of went up the tower. That's what it's going to be like for Torghast. And then eventually all of the Shadowlands content will be available to test. They'll wipe the servers and start the broader beta. Early on, you'll see the changes to your spellbook and the unpruning of the abilities that they say they're going to do. There'll be some PvP currency changes, which I think brings it back to what it more used to be, where you had your currency, you went to a vendor, you got your stuff. The new player experience will happen, and it's going to be the Alliance version of it, unfortunately. The new player experience is, if you remember what they announced, is that everything's going to be compressed, and they're going to make it so you can kind of pick your expansions that you want to level through and everything. We'll get to see a little bit of a glimpse of Soulbinds, the Covenant Sanctums, legendary items. There's the link for the Blizzard opt-in. So yeah, hopefully, I do definitely hope I get into it. I certainly will be talking about it the moment that I get in, if and when I actually get into it. So now, let's talk about the two different styles that they can do with the alpha beta cycle of Shadowlands, because there's two very distinctive lines of thought when it comes to the alpha beta cycle of Shadowlands here. Biff is a dud. We have to face it that, much like Warlords of Draenor, Biffa is definitely a dud, and there's going to be a gap. Now, for me, my guild has consistently rated from its inception back in 2004, 2005, all the way up till right now. We have never really broken apart. We have never had major issues, with the exception of Warlords. We did have enough players have real-life issues and content burnout that we unfortunately did stop in Warlords of Draenor. It's a little bit of a black spot on our record, but it's one that I always have to acknowledge. And it worked out for me because I was not working at the time, so I was able to heavily focus on the Marvel Avengers Alliance streaming on Twitch at the time. So it was kind of cosmic. And then when Marvel Avengers Alliance was just about ready to die, Legion was ready, and everything had a bit of a rebirth. So I have long been facing the fact that here in Battle for Azeroth, we'll probably be going to face another Warlords issue where people are probably just going to want to stop raiding, and they're going to be burnt out on the expansion. Now, hopefully, we get through all of the available content right now before that winds up happening. And it's looking good for that. I really do think we're going to be able to make that happen. At least get through all of the heroics, and then once the heroics are done, we're going to have to make a decision whether or not, like, we go back and farm achievements, or just say, you know what, everybody, let's go ahead and just take off until the next expansion, you know, mentally rest and everything like that. And we'll see what happens. So if they have a short cycle where the alpha and the beta proceeds quickly, and we get Shadowlands quickly, it could mean the Shadowlands content is not very well prepped. And that could be dangerous. Similar to how a lot of people used to say Windows versions had a good and a bad, and a good and a bad. Blizzard cannot afford to have that cadence again. That sort of heartbeat of good expansion, bad expansion, good expansion, bad expansion. And they super cannot afford to have yet another bad expansion. Shadowlands has to be done right from the get-go. And I think one of the key things that they need to do, and I was really mulling this over in the noggin before doing this video, as I was kind of thinking what I would say and everything like that. I think they need to, plot-wise, establish the big bad early on, and the big bad needs to be overarching throughout the entire expansion. They need to have a situation where, similar to Arthas in Wrath of the Lich King, and somewhat similar to Deathwing in Cataclysm, they need to have a villain that haunts you through the entire expansion, and you know exactly what you're in for when it comes time for the end of the expansion. Draw parallels to the Final Fantasy games to see how that works. Final Fantasy VII, you knew that Sephiroth was going to be your big bad pretty much throughout the whole game, and then he was. So you were prepped for it, and you were invested in hating him and getting ready to kill him when it was time to do it. And then you have Final Fantasy VIII, where you're kind of not exactly sure, but then it winds up being the Sorceress. 9, of course, has the giant swerve where you think Kuja is going to be the big bad, and then it winds up being Necron, if I remember correctly. 10, yeah, 10 has a bit of the swerve too, but you do definitely spend a good amount thinking that it's going to be, you know, either Jack in some form or Seymour Grotto. I think the best storytelling happens to come from, in the Blizzard games and the Final Fantasy games, when there is a clear big bad that you go throughout the entire story building towards wanting to really smash the face of the big bad. And Arthas was considered some of the best plot design that Blizzard has ever had in their games. When Deathwing came around in Cataclysm, a lot of people compared that unfavorably to the Lich King, because the Lich King haunted you throughout the entire leveling experience. He showed up in dungeons, he showed up in quests. He had a sort of Friday the 13th thing in Halls of Reflection, where he just or Michael Myers to a certain degree, where he just plodded along and chased you. It was good plot work. Legion, for example, World of Warcraft, the big bad was kind of an entity. It was a whole collective. So even though you weren't necessarily prepped the whole expansion to think that there would be one entity that you were going to face, or one singular entity, you sort of knew you were taking on an entire cult to a degree. Here in Biffa, you never really got your feet under you as to what was the real point of it all. Like, what is the singular focus other than constantly squabbling with the opposite faction? And I think that led to some janky storytelling in this expansion. So I really think that Shadowlands, if they set up Sylvanas to be the big bad the whole way through, and they don't really have like a M. Night Shyamalan plot twist in there, I think that really could be the way to go. in this, and I think that is one of the things they could do well if they set up Sylvanas to be extremely strong, but also very obnoxious in her strength. Like, maybe you think you get her at some point, or have sufficiently weakened her, and then it turns out, nope, you haven't, she recovers, and now you're pissed and you want another shot at her, and then she shows up as the big bad at the end of the expansion, and you finally get revenge for everything she's done along the way. I think it could work. But that's just, in terms of plot. In terms of the beta and alpha cycle, and how quickly they proceed to giving us Shadowlands, well, that's a bit of a mixed bag, and Bellular really does a good point of mentioning this. If we have a short cycle that we get Shadowlands relatively quickly, definitely within 2020, and certainly with, a little bit more time before the holiday season of 2020, is that going to be good or bad? Well, it will be good for their engagement numbers. They probably won't take that big of a dip as we proceed towards Shadowland, and maybe they can effectively roll people down the hill of the end of Biffa and get them into Shadowlands with maybe only a relatively small speed bump. One of those speed bumps that's nice and rounded, and you don't have to drive 5 miles an hour over it, otherwise it feels like your car is going to fall apart. The bad side of that is, will they be able to develop in enough time properly? We are living in unprecedented times where we don't know how Blizzard's content teams are affected by the itis that's going around, and telework and quarantine and everything like that. If you're an artist, you probably have some utilities at home that allow you to draw and come up with content and everything like that at nearly maximum capabilities. But what if somebody's got their really high-end workstation in the office and can't do anything about getting that home, or doesn't have a good tablet or art station at home? We don't know how that's going to... Oh, I do have to do Rift Hairs. We don't know how that's going to be affected. Back-end coding work. How's that going to come into play? Another thing to consider is the safety of their code and everything. If so many people are going to be telecommuting, are they afraid that the transmission or the collaboration of their code work is going to be safe? Could somebody get hacked and major leaks and reveals happen because they don't have secure transmission of their work back and forth? That's definitely, another thing. We've all seen cloud services have issues. Apple Photos and iTunes has been hacked numerous times, and personal pictures have been put out there on the web and everything like that. So that security of content is definitely a concern. If they have a short run and we do get Shadowlands quickly, quality might be at risk. Now, we don't know what's going on in Blizzard right now. They may be further along in Shadowlands planning than we think, and maybe that's why we did not really get a whole lot of content in 8.3 and why things are mostly stopped. I personally think Biffa could do with another dungeon or two somewhere towards the end, or like starting around now. Just give us something else to work on other than Nyalotha, but we know that's not going to happen. The game needs it. It's not going to happen. All of the efforts right now are likely on Shadowlands, and to be honest, that's a good thing. So if they short cycle it, we may have quality issues, and we don't know if things will be tested properly. Apparently, testing for alphas and betas with Shadowlands are going to be very specific. They're going to do things in a way that it's like, okay, right now, this is what's released, this is what we're going to be testing. And then that's going to be done. And okay, we're now moving on to the next thing, and then the next thing. It's going to be, for a while, more targeted rather than broad. Like, here's the game in early access. That's how a lot of their other betas have gone in the past. It's like you get in there, and it's pretty much the game as it's going to be while it's live. It's just they call it beta. They're looking to be more specific with this one, where each phase will be targeted on a particular aspect of the new expansion, and I really think that's what they need. If they go for a long alpha beta cycle over here, what's going to happen? Well, numbers will probably drop in terms of engagement. They're probably going to see a little bit of a hit of active players. And, you know, in all honesty, I think they're going to have to live through that. I think they're going to have to take it on the chin and say, okay, we know the numbers are going to dip for a little bit. We probably don't expect people to unsub. But actual active day-to-day logins are probably going to dip. Attempts at organized content are going to dip, like raiding and PvP and everything. People will probably be doing generic content like mount farming or taking advantage of the 100% experience boost and start leveling alts. I think they need to internally say to themselves, okay, if we take this numbers hit, we need to be okay with it. And that's a hard conversation to have when you're new WoW. Well, I shouldn't say new, it's been around since like 2008, but when you're in this very heavy Activision related Blizzard where numbers mean so much to them, it may be a very, very hard conversation to have. But it's one they need to have, and it's a lesson they need to learn from Biffa. They need to put pride aside. And he left a little bit before the Void Keeper. They need to put pride aside and do the right thing by the player base. And the player base may just have to suffer a numbers dip if we get a quality expansion. If they take the time to give us a very hearty, well done, robust expansion with good plot, good mechanics. God, this guy is like fucking slow stalking me over here. Aw, damn it, I knew he was gonna go for my fucking bow dude over there. They need to make sure everything is spot on. They cannot have any weaknesses whatsoever when Shadowlands releases. They need to have the zones be great, the quests need to be great, the classes need to be unpruned like they're saying. I think they need to listen to the feedback and be more willing to do things that the playing populace wants rather than something that maybe internally they want. Because I think what they want, this expansion shows, is not going to work. And I think a general ennui over the years with classes is going to show that it's not going to work. I mean, as a druid main, I miss my Mark of the Wild incredibly. When we knew that Fortitude and Arcane Intellect was coming back, I was so happy to think that I would get Mark back again. And one of the reasons why I was so happy about getting Mark is because I was one of those people who every time... I did not want to pull that guy at all. Goddamn archer zombie. Um, one of the reasons why I was so happy to have Mark back, or Paw, as a lot of people call it, is because I was one of those people who, anytime we wiped or anytime we started a raid or a group, I was right on top of hitting that mark button. You know, some of those buffing classes, you have to scream at them to get their buff out. I marked random people in towns. So buffing in raids and groups and everything was something I never had to be told to do twice. That's for damn sure. So I liked my Paw, and when we didn't get it back, it was disappointing. When the fact that I don't have Innervate as a Guardian, that's disappointing. There's just been a lot that my class and my spec have lost over the years, and I'm really excited to see if we get some of it back. So I think Blizzard needs to be honest with themselves and say, we need to take the numbers hit and we need to put out a really good expansion. Their theme, the theme song of that office every single day until Shadowlands is done, and I don't mean just the alphas and the betas, every single patch, every single micro patch, mini patch, every day, Blizzard needs to think, do this right or we lose people. And I think they have to make those sacrifices along the way at every point in Shadowlands, is that we maybe don't want to do this. This may be hard to do, but they have to do it. Whatever it is that seems tough, or maybe they're reluctant to do, if the community seems to want it, they really have to make a very community-based game. I mean, unfortunately, World of Warcraft community is never unified. You have the hardcore people, you have the mid-core people, you have the PvPers. Aspects of PvE are sometimes nerfed in favor of PvP and everything. But they need to, on a whole, listen to the community, have good community managers, pumping them with feedback. They need to know exactly where the pulse of Shadowlands is starting today, and know that pulse the entire expansion, because they cannot have a bad expansion whatsoever. People who continually review World of Warcraft content on YouTube are saying it. As much as I would hate to see it happen, my girlfriend is saying it, that unless they hit it out of the park, she's done, and I really don't want to play a raid without her in this, but it may be a necessary corpse in this if they don't nail it. So I really hope they do the right thing with Shadowlands, and if it takes a while for it to get into our grubby hands, it's gonna suck in that respect, and that now is probably a time where we're even more hungry to have something new, because we are all sitting under lockdowns and quarantines and not going out as much to protect our health and everything. This could be the time when people want to distract themselves with something new, but I think kind of the way they can do that is to, when it comes time for the beta, allow a lot of people in, heavily stress the servers, heavily stress the game, give people something to do that isn't Biffa but is still World of Warcraft. Even if it's a long cycle, if we don't get Shadowlands until, say, Thanksgiving-ish of 2020, you know, maybe slightly ahead of Christmas, yeah, okay. As long as it's good. That's the thing. They will really, really be dead to people if they take a long time for the alpha and the beta cycle, and we get it late in 2020 or maybe early 2021, and then it's shit. That's where this is going to get really bad and dangerous, if they take a long time and produce something poor. If they take a short time and produce something poor, I think people are still not going to be accepting of it. I think it has to definitely get knocked out of the park. So that's my take on Shadowlands. As soon as I get into the alpha or the beta, I will definitely be covering it on the channel, especially if they do very pointed and targeted parts of alphas and betas. It's really easy to do content around that, like, hey, here's Revendrath. Let's see what it's like for the first 20 minutes of questing over here. Or yeah, the new player experience I probably would not cover, especially if it's the Alliance side. But, you know, hey, here's 30 minutes of Torgath. Like, this is what the challenges seem to be like. I'd love to do content like that. My Wrath of the Lich King beta content on my channel was very popular back in the day, and I certainly would like to have that level of activity again. So, we'll see. Let me know what you think. Are you chomping at the bit to get Shadowlands, and do you want it sooner rather than later? Or are you willing to sacrifice having a little bit of downtime between Biffa and Shadowlands if it means they produce a really good expansion when it comes time? So let me know. Peace out, everybody.